Stories where the bad guys win are fascinating to me, and they always manage to build up these really high stakes that make you question how the heroes would even manage to pull themselves out of this one. Our story today begins not too long after one that we actually recently examined. The nefarious Dr. Eggman has emerged out of his Mr. Tinker persona and is back in absolute full force to remind us that he's the real deal as a twisted super genius who should absolutely not be ignored. Once returned to himself, Eggman would head into a dark, isolated room in his base, in which he requests Orbot to pull up some mysterious schematics. It's here that the Doctor would first unveil his plan for a virus that would soon be known as the Metal Virus. It wouldn't take long for Eggman to get his plans into action. It would start small with a flower drenched in a metallic ooze which left the flower in a robotic state. And of course, this was only the beginning for the Mad Doctor, as he would be ready to test on live animals next. Eggman would then begin his test on a small rabbit, Pocky. Once drenched in the ooze, he would be completely under the Doctor's control as a mindless metallic zombie. And not only that, but after being commanded to grab Picky, a pig, the twisted madman would find that the virus would simply spread through touch. Even without Eggman's orders, this infected rabbit would be ready to attack any non-infected in sight. Eggman would then command the small squirrel to grab the infected flower from beforehand, and under threat of being infected by Pocky, well, he would have no choice but to grab said flower. With the flower in hand, he would touch a variety of non-organic materials, and we would learn that the virus would not spread throughout any of them. This went as planned for the Doctor, and much to Eggman's twisted joy, he would find that the virus would spread from flora to fauna, which is to say essentially that it could spread from plants to animals and vice versa. But where is our heroic blue blur throughout all this? Well, Sonic would find himself brought back to Windmill Village, the same place that Mr. Tinker once called his home, but this time it would be under much darker circumstances. He would find the village leader tied up to a tree, and once Sonic and Tails would rescue this elder, they would be confronted by Rough and Tumble, the same hooligans who had actually kidnapped Mr. Tinker from this village not too long ago. Although intimidating in stature, and now supporting new tech from Eggman, these two would stand no chance against this dynamic duo, and would find themselves pretty quickly defeated. Interestingly though, Sonic would not be able to gain any information from either of these criminals, as they would be sucked away into some kind of wormhole. This power actually comes from Dr. Starline, and thanks to his Topaz gem, he can create portals pretty much anywhere with his glove. It's actually not too dissimilar to something we've seen in Archie with Dr. Finitivus and his ability to teleport. This mystery surrounding Eggman and his new super virus would continue as later Amy and Sonic would find themselves in an old abandoned Eggman base, which was situated underground in a cave that actually looks like Eggman's face. I gotta love it. Once inside, Amy would succeed in hacking into Eggman's network, and with this unrestricted access, she might be able to actually find some information surrounding what the newly returned Doctor is up to. But where exactly are the badniks here? In a place such as this, there should be some kind of defending robots, but instead it's completely barren. Well, it would turn out that Amy and Sonic actually fell right into Eggman's trap, and he would shortly thereafter outfit Rough and Tumble with two backpacks fitted with the same metallic liquid that we had seen before, but Eggman of course wouldn't tell them that, and instead he would inform them that these backpacks would actually serve as their ace in the hole, as all they would have to do is hit the button on the straps and they would get the upper hand against Sonic. Also Eggman would say his iconic line, "Get a load of this!" And that's how you know that it's Ian Flynn who's writing this story. Rough and Tumble would come barreling through a wall in a massive drill-like vehicle towards Amy and Sonic. Ultimately, however, the two would succeed in destroying this large vehicle, and the goons would be forced to bail out of their vehicle, and they would just narrowly escape falling into a bottomless pit. With them defeated and, well, their backs up against a wall, they would have no choice but to confidently press their secret button. But much to their dismay, the button would unleash the ooze in their backpack onto them, and it would quickly encapsulate their bodies. This would leave them as incredibly powerful robotic zombies, who would give both Amy and Sonic a run for their money. Even Amy's Pico Pico hammer wouldn't be effective at all against them, as it would just leave a gaping hole inside of Rough that would quickly regenerate itself as though no damage had been dealt at all to him. This effectively created an unstoppable being. Even Sonic struggled with multiple homing attacks, proving to be very ineffective against this zombified lumbering opponent, which Sonic aptly nicknamed a Zombot. But in doing these homing attacks, it would actually also spread this metallic goop to Sonic, which would leave him unknowingly infected. Ultimately, Sonic would have no choice but to send both Rough and Tumble down the pit, and, well, would avoid touching Amy out of fear that he might spread whatever this goop on him is to her. Unfortunately for Sonic, this would only be the beginning of something much, much worse on the horizon. From here, with the help of Tails, Sonic would learn that his speed is actually vital in keeping the virus in remission, meaning that, while it isn't cured, as long as he continues running, he could keep himself from becoming a Zombot. There would unfortunately not be more time to look into this, as Eggman would reveal his newest creation to Windmill Village, a giant face that looks just like his. Well, a giant face that would spew massive amounts of virus onto the town that once accepted him and aided him in his rehabilitation. Try as they might, the citizens were no match, and they quickly found themselves as mindless servants to this mad doctor. The citizens tried their best to flee, but ultimately it was all for naught, as this virus spread like absolute wildfire from citizen to citizen until Eggman found himself with a new army under his control. This horde would then be commanded to go out into the world and spread the virus to everything they would come in contact with. The virus would, of course, spread incredibly quickly, and it wouldn't be long before the Chaotix were warned of Eggman's return. Although initially optimistic, this optimism really wouldn't last long, as we'd find that the Zombots had already spread their reach to the Chaotix HQ. The group would rush out of their HQ only to find that the entire city it's located in was being poured on by Eggman's floating face as it corrupted every citizen in its path. Now, here's something that actually surprised me about Vector in this arc, and that's that he's a bit of a badass. He'd fend off citizens with a stop sign that he'd tear out of the ground with some superhuman strength, and he would also give finger guns to women that he saved. Like, what? Gone are the days of Vector asking for his rap TV, is all I have to say about this. The Chaotix would formulate a plan to get all of the citizens down to the docks where they could await rescue, and hold on, wait, did IDW make the Chaotix cool and competent? Like, seriously, these guys are awesome. So the group would work to save citizens, with Vector even willing to give himself up to protect everyone. Luckily though, Sonic would swoop in at the last moment as backup and sweep all the Zombots up into the air while continuing to move to keep the virus at bay. The writing around Vector would continue to surprise me as a citizen would find herself infected, and in the heat of the moment, Vector would separate her from everybody else with vehicles that he picked up with that superhuman strength that he's apparently got, and would place them around her to keep her segregated from the other survivors. He actually looks legit remorseful as he apologizes to this terrified infected who hasn't completely turned yet. This would lead to ire from Charmy B, who was very against the idea of leaving behind someone, but Vector makes it clear that it's important to save those who are uninfected and return for the others later. Once at the docks, the Chaotix would hold back a swarm of infected as the rescued citizens would escape onto an aircraft that got there in the nick of time. Things were actually going pretty well, until suddenly Charmy decided that things shouldn't go well anymore, as, well, he figured he would go rogue and return for the lady they left behind. Espio would try and stop him, but just find himself stopped by another infected. At the car prison that Vector had created, Charmy would find that this woman unfortunately was completely infected now. And not only that, but he would find himself completely overrun by Zombots, who would swarm him from all directions and eventually even pull this terrified boy down into the swarm. Vector would have no choice but to send Sonic to try and rescue Charmy, as the fractured Chaotix departed on this shuttle. Charmy, unfortunately, would be lost in the swarm, and Sonic would have to continue to save who he could. Eventually, he would find himself near Cream the Rabbit's home, in an attempt to rescue her, her mother, and her Chaos. Cream and her family weren't without support, however, as they found themselves aided by Gemerald the robot from Sonic Advance 3 of all people. Gemerald would cause a slight snag, however, as he would mistakenly identify Sonic as a threat due to his infection, and well, he was pretty much ready to kill any infected Mobians. Luckily though, Cream is here to stop him, and through her reasoning, Gemerald would take a non-lethal approach, which is great, and he also wouldn't try and kill Sonic, which is doubly great. Well, not great for the Zombots, but at least they're not gonna die. Unfortunately, Zombots would actually get into Cream's house, and they would end up attacking her mother. Vanilla would urge her daughter to escape as Cheese worked on defending them, and would ultimately sacrifice himself along with Chocola as they attempted to hold back the Zombots in a moment that is equal parts cute and tear-jerkingly sad. As Cream gets pulled away, Sonic would convince Cream that she needs to be brave and to save herself and her mother, which, holy moly, it made me so sad reading this. Cream would escape, and Sonic wouldn't actually have any time to clear anything out here, as he would get info from Rouge that Eggman was on his way to Sunset City and that Shadow and Omega would need his help. We'd also learn during this moment that the Zombots are actually responding less and less to Eggman, and that the virus is actually mutating into its own separate thing from what Eggman had initially created. This is something that doesn't really seem to concern Eggman a whole lot, as well, he's still dominating the world and defeating his opponents, which is ultimately all he cares about. But Starline finds this incredibly worrisome, and also finds himself disillusioned from the image that he had of his hero Eggman in his mind. By the time Sonic would arrive in Sunset City, it would already be overrun by Zombots. He would find an apartment building, and before he could rush in and save everyone, he would find himself and the Zombots being shot at. These shots would be fired by none other than Omega, who would aid in keeping the Zombots away by using lethal force. Luckily, the Zombots could withstand the gunshots from Omega, or Omega would be a mass murderer. I mean, he probably is one already, but let's not look too far into that. With that, Sonic would get the citizens to the hotel where Rouge and forces were holding down the fort, and they would need Sonic's help in holding it down just a little bit longer until Shadow arrived with their escape vehicle. Shadow, in an aptly over-the-top moment, would arrive barreling through the horde in a massive transport a la Sonic Adventure 2, which is a kind of fun callback to see, honestly. Shadow is so edgy in this, and I love him. He's convinced that he's strong enough to take on the Zombots without needing to run, unlike Sonic. And he has this line where he goes, "Cowards run, I win," that just fits him so perfectly, and I love it. Shadow would leap into the crowd head first, just full of Zombots, and in order to hold them off while the civilians load up inside of the truck. And man, like, what is up with this arc and making everybody just so freaking badass all the time? While in this fight, Shadow would learn that, well, maybe he's not the ultimate life form that he thought he was, and he would be quickly overrun and corrupted by the virus, leaving himself taken down by his own hubris. Not only that, but now Sonic would be stuck dealing with the consequences of Shadow's actions, as he now found himself pinned up by none other than the Zombot Shadow, who honestly just looks so incredible to me. Sonic and Zombot Shadow would duke it out, with the two of them actually being pretty evenly matched, and Sonic, for the second time in an IDW comic, would go on to give me flashbacks to Super Smash Bros. Brawl.
You're too slow!
Rouge would then decide to take the helm at the transport as Sonic and Omega remained behind to give them cover. The Zombot Shadow would rush at the two, and Omega would spew out his own cheese, but also really awesome line as he announced that there is no retreat and no mercy. I love it. It's so good. Omega would put up a pretty decent fight against Shadow as he'd slam him to the ground, but unfortunately, Zombot Shadow is just too much and would succeed in causing major damage to Omega. All hope would be lost as it seems that Sonic and Omega were completely overwhelmed, and well, Omega was being torn apart from the inside. So it pretty much spelled the end, if not for the backup that came from Silver and Tails. Well, mostly Silver, who would buy Sonic some time and allow them to escape, as well as permitting Tails to grab Omega's head before fleeing off into the sky with Silver. Eventually, Sonic would arrive at Restoration HQ. This is one of the last bastions of hope against the Zombots, and the coordination center where Amy would deal with sending out reinforcements to different locations that were under attack. Things here are dire. Citizens are crammed in, and after having lost so much, it's really hard to keep morale up. Teams were out in the field, and they were being lost left and right against the non-stop horde. On top of that, things aren't looking so good for Eggman and Snively. I mean Starline. Sorry, wrong universe. However, weirdly similar motivations for their betrayal. Starline is getting ready to sabotage Eggman and then take over. His plan is to find the Deadly Six, as they seem to have control over machines, and of course, with control over machines, they would be able to help with the Zombots, and with Starline having the conch in his possession that can control them, he would be able to then control the Zombots by proxy. Restoration HQ was basically held together by duct tape, and that duct tape was named Amy Rose. Amy kept things coordinated, but ultimately it was an uphill losing battle. Luckily, she had Cream here to help keep her spirits up. We'd learn here that the Chaotix managed to not only find Zombot Charmy during this time, but they actually also managed to contain him and bring him into the base, which might not be a great idea. But Vector, surprisingly, would continue to be pretty awesome, as he would refer to Charmy as a hero for the sacrifice he made, and would refuse to abandon his teammate, despite General's insistence that, well, it's a really bad idea to have an infected person inside of this base. Despite what you might think though, Charmy wouldn't be the catalyst that would result in the fall of Restoration HQ. No, actually, it would be this unnamed monkey right here, who, despite being infected, would come to Restoration HQ out of fear of turning alone, and boy, would that spell trouble for everybody here. Through the chaos of people running away from this monkey, Vector would be knocked over and, well, Zombot Charmy would break free. Espio would just nearly sound the alarm as General swooped in to protect Cream. Amy would then rush in and fend off the Zombots as she attempted to find any survivors to escape with. We'd find that Cream's mother would actually find herself cornered, and she would sacrifice herself as she attempted to protect her daughter. I'm not going to lie, I cried a little bit when I was reading this, and when I saw Amy swoop away with Cream, it was a tearjerker, I'm not gonna lie. As Vector and General attempted to seal the doors, the infected Charmy would burst in and Vector would tackle him to the ground before he could infect anybody else. Unfortunately, this tackle would then seal Vector's fate. As the coolest dude alive apparently now, Vector would then take Charmy out into the mob of newly affected Zombots, sacrificing himself in order to hold back the Zombot mob, leaving Espio as the last remaining uninfected Chaotix member, which, holy cow, why is Vector so cool in this? Meanwhile, in Central City, Tangle, Tails, and Whisper would find that Eggman is ready to conquer yet another metropolitan area, and that things are really starting to look dire. Tails would have to hold himself down inside of his workshop and hide from approaching Zombots as he worked on a cure. Meanwhile, Tangle and Whisper would buy him some time by taking on the approaching Zombots, and Whisper would continue to prove that she is just so incredibly awesome as one of the new additions to this comic. During this time, Tails would start to find a cure by using the biometrics from Sonic, and just as hope was restored, it would be lost as the Zombot Chaos from before would destroy his electrical connection. But at least Tails had the hard drive backup, right? Well, no, unfortunately. He would get overrun by Zombots infiltrating his shop, and he would drop his data, thus destroying the cure that he had just discovered. Seriously upset, Tails would emerge in the Tornado 2 in that mech form from Sonic Adventure 2, which was just such a wild time in gaming to think that Tails once piloted a mech. Tails would rush out and provide cover in his mech for any of the survivors, but unfortunately, this awesome mech would be quickly overrun, and sadly, he would have to bid his old mech farewell as he left it to be destroyed by the flurry of Zombots surrounding him. At least he'll be able to recreate his cure at Restoration HQ, right? Or, well, he would have been able to do that if not for the fact that he just learned from Amy that not only was Restoration HQ gone, but also mostly everybody inside of it was gone too now, so oh boy, things are looking tough now. The world in which Sonic inhabits is in shambles. Metallic zombies under the control of Dr. Eggman are outnumbering the uninfected by an incredible margin. Restoration HQ, the last beacon of hope throughout all of this, has just fallen to an outbreak, and it has left only a few survivors remaining. So, where does that leave us now? And where is Sonic during all of this? Sonic would find himself at Barricade Town, a creative name I know, where he would spot Eggman. The Doctor would be here running tests of his own with Dr. Starline as they attempted to figure out the right frequencies to regain control over the Zombot army. Unfortunately for the Doctors, this wouldn't be working well at all for them. And doubly unfortunately for Starline, he would learn that there is actually no vaccine in existence to protect either the Doctors from being infected. Triply unfortunate for all of them, Sonic would run up to the two and things would get pretty seriously heated. Sonic would attempt to reason with Eggman, hoping that he could get him back to like he was with Mr. Tinker, and although Eggman initially mocks Sonic, there actually seems to be a part of him that is reminiscent of this time gone by in the simpler life of Mr. Tinker. Sadly though, he's still not willing to go back to those ways. With no other option, the two would begin to duke it out, and Sonic would actually knock the Doctor into the city below, a city that is full of Zombots that Eggman has no control over. In a twist of actual good luck for Eggman, his commands would suddenly work, and he would manage to turn the army away from him and onto Sonic, who would find himself slowly enveloped by the Zombot army. This would be thanks to Starline, who managed to actually find a working signal to control the Zombots. This luck for these two Doctors, however, would be pretty short-lived, as Sonic would rocket himself up and destroy Eggman's vehicle, thus removing the control signal from the Zombots. With Starline's power of teleportation, the two would manage to escape from this chaos, but unfortunately, with the destruction caused by Sonic, the command signal that they had discovered would be lost. Tired of Eggman's attitude towards this whole thing, Starline would finally take things into his own hands as he would approach the Zeddy in order to get their aid in controlling the Zombots. Meanwhile, as Sonic escaped the city, he would get a call from Amy and learn that things were dire, and the last of Restoration HQ was at Tangle's hometown in an attempt to do an evacuation that needed Sonic's help. So, an exhausted Sonic who's yet to have any chance to relax runs off into the distance. Espio in this town would find himself saved just in the nick of time by Sonic, who arrived, and after asking Espio where Vector and Charmy were, Espio would go off on Sonic. Espio would actually blame Sonic for having lost both Vector and Charmy due to the fact that Sonic left Mr. Tinker to live in Windmill Village instead of dealing with him, and thus effectively stopping Eggman before he could return. Of course, there was no way to know that Mr. Tinker would turn, and this Mr. Tinker stuff might be a little bit confusing to you if you don't know about him, but I do actually actually have a video covering Mr. Tinker entirely if you want to learn more about him. To make matters even worse, Gemerald would realize that the levels of infection inside of Sonic were actually growing, thus adapting to Sonic's speed, meaning that Sonic actually only would have a limited amount of time before losing to this infection completely. Amy would end up having to unfortunately call for a retreat as they found themselves seriously outnumbered by these zombots. But the issue is, the moment Sonic and his friends would stop holding back from the zombots, well, everyone would be quickly overrun. Luckily though, Tangle has a plan that essentially involves tying up her tail around lampposts throughout town in order to stop the zombots. A plan that might work if not for the fact that, well, she would have to be left behind and she would also be infected. Well, Tangle would actually have the first part of that covered, which, as it turns out, she was already infected, and so this would be her last good act before turning. Sonic would run Tangle through the town until her tail couldn't stretch any longer. A teary-eyed Tangle would compose herself and then hold back the horde of zombots herself while Sonic returned to aid with the evacuation. But hold on, the onion cutting is coming pretty soon. Once back at the ship, Sonic would inform the survivors that Tangle was infected and has chosen to stay behind to protect everyone. He would also continue a trend that we saw in part 1 of just some of the most badass dialogue for a Sonic comic, where he says, "She said she was sorry, but heroes have nothing to be sorry about," which just sounds so cool. This would absolutely devastate Whisper, who would lunge out of the ship yelling Tangle's name in what is honestly some of the most beautiful art that I've ever seen in an IDW comic so far. Whisper would even attempt to attack Amy, who was holding her back from getting infected, but luckily Whisper's wisps would pull her back into the ship, thus allowing them to depart in what is honestly just such a somber setting. On the ship, Whisper would just be absolutely bawling after having lost her closest friend, and it's really gutting to see, especially knowing Whisper's backstory. Meanwhile, on the ground, Tangle would fight through the infection, and ultimately she would turn into a terrifying zombot with a club for a tail. And I'm not crying, you're crying. Hey, so maybe you were wondering what Knuckles was up to this whole time? He's chilling on Angel Island, high above the ground, in the sky, protecting the Master Emerald, so I mean, what else is new? It's here that the remnants of Restoration HQ would find themselves, and from the shuttle, Sonic would jump onto the ground below, and oh boy, Sonic is looking a little worse for wear after having not been able to run for a little while. He's nearly completely corrupted at this point. So Sonic would go zoom off into the distance while Tails and Amy would catch Knuckles up to speed. With Knuckles all caught up, the group could finally start to plan something out. Or at least they would have been able to plan something out if yet another wrench hadn't just been thrown at them. As Dr. Eggman and Dr. Starline, along with Metal Sonic, would come flying through a portal. Amy would be 100% ready to smash some heads, which is awesome to see, as she just proves how cool she is, but Sonic would stop her to hear out the doctors. It turns out that Starline attempted to betray the Doctor with the help of the Zeddy and Metal Sonic, who was under the control. Also Eggman would refer to himself as Daddy when talking to Metal Sonic, which is something that I never thought that I would see, and quite frankly, something that I hope to never see again. Starline would immediately get beat up, and the conch that he was using to control the Zeddy would be taken from him, thus leaving him without any kind of advantage on his side. We'd learn from Eggman that this conch is only good at keeping the Zeddy under control as long as your lungs last, so the trio would manage to escape through Starline's portal and left the Zeddy with all of the Chaos Emeralds that they had. With this turn, Sonic and the team would have no choice but to accept Eggman and Starline into their team because, as we know, your enemy's enemy is your friend, and in this case, they're gonna need all the help they can get. Eggman would inform them that the metal virus is actually becoming increasingly unstable and will begin to atrophy the cells in the host's body, which means that effectively the zombots are soon going to disintegrate. Well, soon as in 200 years, but I mean, soon enough. Silver would even back this up by explaining that in his future, where he's from, this is exactly what happened and everything is left all metallic. So, I mean, bad news about Silver's future, but also kind of good news that we don't have to worry about an Iblis trigger in IDW. What we should worry about is Whisper, who is ready to headshot Eggman, but thanks to Cream, the Doctor lives yet another day. Cream would be the voice of reason as she would save Eggman as she explains that he's one of their biggest hopes to find a cure, and if they want their friends and family back, they're going to have to play nice with him, at least for now. This would leave a sobbing Whisper with Cream and a decapitated Omega together in a rather sweet moment that goes on to further cement my love for all three of these characters. Starline would get ready to leave before getting stopped by Metal Sonic, who would hold his arm in place, and then Eggman would actually take his glove and toss Starline into the portal, and well, what happens to Starline is a story for another time. The team would then have to divide and conquer to take down 5 of the 6 Deadly Six, who are presently controlling different areas with their powers amplified by the Chaos Emeralds. And while they're doing that, Tails and Eggman could work together. These teams would be spread incredibly thin though as it stands, but thankfully Amy has one last call that she can make for help. It's the Babylon Rogues, and honestly, it's not a terrible idea to call them in, considering that they are literal thieves, and so I mean, getting these emeralds is kind of in their repertoire. With that, it'll be time to take on the Deadly Six, and they'd have to do so quickly as it would only be a matter of time before Zavok, the leader of the Deadly Six, and his army would find the last stance of this resistance. Tails and Eggman would manage to use Starline's topaz in order to create a multi-portal generator in order to send everyone on this mission to hit the Deadly Six all at once. Even with the help of the rogues, this would be an incredibly difficult mission. Espio would have to go alone, and would do so because both Vector and Charmy faced off against the zombies on their own, and so he feels it's only fitting that as the last member of the Chaotix that he should do the same. The teams would then take off into their own portals while Sonic stayed behind to continue running to fend off the virus. General would initially be assigned to go off on his own, but Cream would lunge in and go after him. Alright, so listen, we're gonna rapid fire through all of the Zeddy here because we've only got so much time. Tails and Amy would go up against Zomom, and the two would do Zomom like a Rancor in Star Wars. Meanwhile, Whisper and Silver would use Refraction to snipe our emo boy Zor. Espio would break Zaz's face with his foot, Storm would punch Master Zix in the face, and finally we've got Cream and General. Cream and General would take on Xena, who would take control of General, and Cream would show off her power to Spin Dash, which I didn't know she could do. Cream would ultimately get overpowered, unfortunately, by Xena, and Xena would tangle Cream towards a swarm of Zombots. Luckily though, through the power of love, General would break free from Xena's control and save Cream. Unfortunately though, it would be too little too late, as Cream would turn out to be infected and would tell General that she would need to stay behind. Terrified, she covers her eyes and gets ready to wait this out. But in yet another scene that got me so incredibly teary, General would actually throw the emerald into the portal and then fly off into the sunset while holding Cream in his arms, telling her that he's going to stay with her until she turned, which, oh my god, it's really touching. All of this would be done not a moment too soon, as Zavok would finally have found his way to Angel Island. The gang, minus Gemerald and Cream, would return with the Chaos Emeralds, and Amy and Sonic would realize the saddest events that just happened to Cream. It's time for a final showdown against Zavok. And, well, Zavok would close into Angel Island as he would taunt Sonic with the faces of his fallen allies in his army. Also, Big the Cat is there. Sonic would make a plan with Silver to stop Zavok, and Eggman would call in Rouge, who was actually hidden away on board the Egg Face, to pull off the biggest jewel heist that she's ever done. Rouge would steal the Chaos Emerald, powering the big face that would essentially plummet to the ground with Zavok inside. From the rubble would come a supercharged Zavok, thanks to the Chaos Emerald that's been jammed inside of his chest. And now Angel Island is going to be part of one heck of a showdown against not only the Zombots, but also this Giga Zavok. Giga Zavok would spit fire onto Angel Island, much to Knuckles' dismay, and Sonic and Silver would collect the 6 Chaos Emeralds that they presently have. He would also throw Zombots onto the island, which would prove to be pretty problematic for those up there. Or, I mean, it might actually spell trouble for them if not for the fact that Knuckles was an absolute badass who was ready to sacrifice himself for the Master Emerald and the refugees here. So Sonic, Silver, and Metal Sonic would rush together in order to enact their final stand. The three would rush Zavok, while those remaining on Angel Island would face off against their once friends and Big the Cat. Interestingly, even Froggy would be there, turned into his own Zombot, which is kind of funny to see as he rushes Eggman after Amy literally saved Eggman from Big the Cat. Together, the 2.5 metallic hedgehogs would manage to get up Zavok and yoink the Chaos Emerald from his chest, just as Sonic began to completely lose himself to the virus. But, of course, this is Sonic, so how else would this end if not for these two hedgehogs going super together and facing off against the Big Bad? The Big Bad who would be absolutely decimated in like one panel in an anime-esque scene of destruction thanks to the Topaz allowing them to teleport about. Using the Warp Topaz and Silver's power to use telekinesis, the two would manage to send the metal virus out of this world. And with that, those infected with the metal virus would find themselves cured without the metal virus attached to them anymore. Whisper and Tangle would be reunited in an adorable scene, the Chaotix would be jamming about, and Eggman would be hanging out with a frog. Rouge would unfortunately lose her chance to spend her last moments with the one she loved, but thankfully Cream would get many more moments with her mother in just such a heartwarming moment. The warp topaz would gradually become more and more unstable though the longer it was used, and finally Sonic would send Silver rocketing away. With that, the metal virus was gone, but so too was Sonic, who ended up lost into a warp portal. And with that, we've reached the end of this long arc that I've wanted to cover for a few months now. Things are finally free from the metal virus. Even Silver's future is completely cured and great now. This was a super fun video to cover, and none of it could have been possible without the help of my editor who came along to honestly save the day here. And quite frankly, it couldn't have been possible without you, the viewer. So I want to take a moment just to thank everybody who helped me along this, and I'm going to throw in just a couple little facts before we close off. Like, did you know that Ian Flynn initially had the story in mind for Archie, but the series was cancelled before it could come to fruition? We'd actually see pretty similar designs to the Zombots during the Dark Enerjack arc that I covered not too long ago, with the Prelates, who actually share a fair deal of similarities with them essentially being robotic zombies that have this really sleek kind of creepy design to them like the Zombots do. This is also the closest IDW has gotten to roboticization, which is kind of crazy considering how often that happened in Archie. And also, this is the third longest arc in like any Sonic comic, which is pretty cool. That is all for now, and I have a few things planned for December, but ultimately, I just hope that you enjoyed this, and I look forward to producing more exciting content like this in the new year. I hope you have a good one.